You've been lied to. Not in an obvious way, not in a dramatic, conspiracy theory kind of way, but in a quiet, socially acceptable, self-help, industrial complex kind of way. You've been taught that motivation is the starting point of change. That before you wake up at 5 a.m., you must feel inspired. Before you go to the gym, you must feel driven. Before you start the business, write the book, study for the exam, fix your life, you must feel ready. And if you don't feel motivated, you wait, you scroll, you delay. You promise yourself you'll begin when you're in the right mindset, and that is where most lives quietly stall. Because motivation is not the engine, it is the exhaust. But we were trained to believe the opposite. Look at how productivity is marketed to you. Cinematic montages of people running at sunrise, cold showers, perfect morning routines, dramatic music swelling in the background. It all creates one subtle message. They are different. They feel something you don't. So when you don't feel that surge of internal fire, you assume something is wrong with you. You assume you lack discipline. You assume you lack ambition. You assume you lack it. But here's the uncomfortable truth. The most productive people in the world do not rely on motivation. They rely on structure. The gym doesn't get attended because someone feels inspired. It gets attended because the shoes are already by the door. The book doesn't get written because the writer woke up electrified with purpose. It gets written because 9 a.m. means writing, no negotiation. We misunderstand the order of operations. We think it goes motivation, action, results. But in reality, it almost always goes action, small progress, motivation. Action creates emotion, not the other way around. Think about the last time you didn't feel like working out. You delayed, you negotiated with yourself, you almost skipped it. But then you forced yourself to start, just 5 minutes, and something shifted. Your body warmed up, your resistance lowered, momentum appeared. You didn't become motivated and then act. You acted and then felt motivated. This is one of the most misunderstood psychological dynamics in personal development. Motivation is often a byproduct of movement. But because we are creatures wired for comfort, our brain resists the first step. Not because we're incapable, but because starting requires energy. And the brain is an energy conservation machine. Your brain's primary goal is not achievement, it's survival. And in a modern environment, survival often looks like comfort. Scrolling is safe, resting is safe, avoiding risk is safe. Growth, on the other hand, is metabolically expensive. It requires uncertainty, effort, potential embarrassment, delayed reward. So your brain does something fascinating. It waits for emotional certainty before it approves action. It whispers, "Let's just start tomorrow." You're not in the mood. Do it when you feel ready. And that whisper feels rational. But it's not logic, it's protection. Here's the paradox. If you wait until you feel motivated, you will rarely begin. And if you rarely begin, you will rarely feel motivated. This is the trap, and it explains why most people live in cycles of inspiration and collapse. They watch a powerful video. They feel a surge of drive. They promise change. They start strong. Then the emotion fades, because emotion always fades. And when it does, the system collapses. Not because they are weak, but because they built their progress on a feeling. Feelings are unstable foundations. They fluctuate with sleep, with stress, with weather, with social comparison, with hormones, with one bad day. If your consistency depends on something that unstable, your consistency will be unstable. So the real question isn't, quote, "How do I get more motivated?" It's how do I make progress without needing motivation at all? That question changes everything. Because once you understand that motivation is unreliable, you stop chasing it. You start engineering your behavior instead. And that shift from emotional dependency to structural design is the difference between people who start and people who transform. The uncomfortable truth is this: motivation is for amateurs. Systems are for professionals. The amateur waits to feel like it. The professional shows up regardless, not because they're superhuman, but because they remove the decision. And when you remove the decision, you remove the emotional negotiation. You reduce the friction. You silence the debate. You eliminate the internal courtroom where excuses argue their case. You don't rise to the level of your inspiration. You fall to the level of your structure. So the problem has never been that you lack motivation. The problem is that you built your life assuming you would always have it. And that assumption is costing you more than you realize. Because the most powerful people you admire, they do not win because they feel more driven. They win because they made motivation irrelevant. And once you see that, truly see it, you stop waiting for the fire. You build the furnace. If motivation were reliable, you would already be where you want to be. Think about it. You have felt motivated before, strongly motivated. There were days you were certain this time would be different. You cleaned your room. You bought the notebook. You mapped out the plan. You even told people about it. For a few days, maybe even a few weeks, you were unstoppable. And then something subtle happened. Nothing dramatic. Nothing catastrophic. You just didn't feel like it one morning. That's it. That was the beginning of the unraveling. You told yourself you'd take one day off, then two. Then you'd restart Monday. And the cycle quietly reset. The problem wasn't your intelligence. It wasn't your ambition. It wasn't your potential. It was your dependence on emotion. Motivation feels powerful because it is emotional. And emotions create intensity. But intensity is not the same as sustainability. Motivation is like a sparkler. Bright. Exciting. Short-lived. You can't build a house with fireworks. You need electricity. Wiring. Infrastructure. Let's look at what's actually happening beneath the surface. Your brain is wired to conserve effort. Every action you take requires energy. And your brain treats energy like a precious currency. When something feels difficult, uncertain, or unrewarding in the short term, your brain flags it as expensive. And when something feels easy, familiar, or immediately pleasurable, your brain flags it as efficient. Now think about your goals. Going to the gym, delayed reward. Studying, delayed reward. Building a business, delayed reward. Scrolling, immediate reward. Food, immediate reward. Comfort, immediate reward. Your brain is constantly calculating cost versus payoff. Motivation temporarily tricks your brain into overvaluing the long-term reward. It floods you with dopamine, not because you've achieved something, but because you anticipate achieving it. Anticipation feels powerful, but anticipation is not action. And here's the catch. Dopamine spikes highest before effort, not after sustained discipline. So motivation gives you a chemical surge at the beginning. But once effort begins, the novelty fades. The brain returns to its default state. Is this worth the energy? And if there is no system in place, the answer becomes not today. That's why relying on motivation is psychologically flawed. It ignores how your brain is designed. You are not broken. You are biological. There's another layer to this. Motivation thrives in clarity. When a goal is new, it feels exciting, undefined, full of possibility. But once reality sets in, the repetition, the boredom, the slow progress, motivation drops. Because the brain is not wired for repetition, it is wired for novelty. And progress requires repetition. This is why people love planning more than doing. Planning feels like progress. It gives the dopamine spike without the friction. Execution, that's where resistance lives. So what do most people do? They chase new goals when the old ones become boring. New diet, new productivity system, new routine, new dream. Because novelty restores motivation. But novelty does not build mastery. Consistency does. And consistency requires something far more stable than a feeling. It requires structure. Think about brushing your teeth. Do you wake up every morning bursting with passion to brush? No. You brush because it's automatic. Because it's integrated. Because it's part of who you are. It requires no emotional ceremony. You don't wait to feel inspired. You just do it. That's what real progress looks like. Boring, repetitive, unemotional. And that's why so few people sustain it. We've romanticized motivation. We've turned discipline into a dramatic movie montage. We've made growth look like adrenaline. But in reality, growth is mostly quiet. It's showing up on the days you feel neutral, or tired, or distracted. Not because you're fired up, but because you decided once and then removed the need to decide again. This is the shift. Motivation asks, do I feel like it today? Structure says, it's 6 a.m., we train. Motivation negotiates. Structure executes. Motivation depends on mood. Structure depends on design. And design always wins long term. The people you think are highly motivated, they aren't. They just eliminated the choice. They reduced friction. They simplified the action. They lowered the barrier to starting. They built environments that make the right behavior easier than the wrong one. And once that system is in place, motivation becomes optional. Not useless, just unnecessary. Because when behavior becomes automatic, emotion becomes irrelevant. And that is the real secret. You don't need more hype. You don't need louder affirmations. You don't need a better playlist. You need fewer decisions. You need fewer negotiations with your future. You need to stop asking yourself every day whether you feel like becoming who you said you wanted to be. Motivation fails because it was never meant to carry the weight of transformation. It's a spark. But sparks don't build empires. Systems do. If motivation is unreliable, then what actually works? What carries you forward when the excitement fades? When the novelty disappears? When life gets inconvenient? The answer is less dramatic than you expect. It's not passion. It's not willpower. It's not a personality trait. It's friction. More specifically, how much of it exists between you and the action you need to take. Most people think success is about increasing motivation, but progress is usually about decreasing resistance. Think about this carefully. If going to the gym required zero preparation, if your clothes were already laid out, if the gym were across the street, if your workout were pre-planned, how often would you go? Now imagine the opposite. You have to pack your bag, find your shoes, drive 30 minutes, figure out what to do once you get there. Suddenly it feels heavier, not because you lack ambition, but because the friction increased. Behavior is not controlled by desire alone. It is controlled by difficulty. This is one of the quiet truths most people overlook. You don't rise to your goals. You fall to the level of your environment. The people who appear disciplined are often just strategically lazy. They make the good behavior easier than the bad one. They don't depend on willpower. They design defaults. Look at your life right now. What behaviors are easiest? Scrolling? Snacking? Delaying? Why? Because they require almost no friction. Your phone is in your pocket. Notifications are automatic. Entertainment is one tap away. Now compare that to deep work. Exercise, learning. Those require setup, effort, energy. So what does your brain choose most often? The easier path. Not because you're weak, but because friction wins. This is why motivation feels necessary. Because when friction is high, you need emotional force to push through it. But what if you lowered the friction instead? What if instead of trying to become more motivated, you made the action so small that resistance barely had time to argue? This is where real change begins. Start with something almost embarrassingly small. 1 push-up, 1 page, 2 minutes. The point isn't intensity, it's initiation. Because starting is the hardest part. Once you begin, momentum takes over. Your brain switches states. Inertia shifts direction. You stop resisting and start engaging. This is physics as much as psychology. An object at rest stays at rest. An object in motion stays in motion. Your habits obey the same law. But here's the subtle mistake people make. They try to transform their entire life in one emotional burst. They redesign their mornings, their diet, their routine, their sleep, their goals, all at once. It feels powerful until it collapses, because they built something that requires daily motivation to sustain. And motivation has an expiration date. Instead, build something so small it feels almost automatic. You want to read more? Put a book on your pillow. Read 1 page before sleep. You want to work out? Do 2 minutes. Not an hour. 2 minutes. You want to write? Open the document. Write 1 sentence. You are not building the final version of yourself. You are building the identity. And identity grows through repetition, not intensity. Every time you show up, even in a tiny way, you cast a vote for the kind of person you're becoming. Miss once? You're human. Miss twice? You're building a pattern. Consistency is less about perfection and more about recovery. The real engine of progress is not massive action. It's repeatable action. Repeatable beats impressive, because impressive requires emotion. Repeatable requires structure. And structure is stable. Here's what most people don't realize. When you reduce friction and lower the barrier to entry, you don't just make action easier. You remove the psychological drama around it. There's no negotiation, no internal debate, no performance. It becomes normal. And normal is powerful. The moment a behavior feels normal, you no longer need to convince yourself to do it. It becomes who you are. This is why the goal is not to become motivated. The goal is to make the right behavior the default behavior. To make starting so easy that not starting feels strange. To make progress automatic enough that emotion becomes irrelevant. Motivation is emotional fuel. Structure is architectural design. And architecture outlasts mood. The truth is uncomfortable, but liberating. You don't need to become a more motivated person. You need to become a more intentional designer of your environment. Because once the environment supports your goals, your brain stops fighting you. And when your brain stops fighting you, progress feels lighter. Not because it is easy, but because it is aligned. And alignment removes resistance. This is where transformation stops being dramatic and starts being inevitable. There is something deeper than friction, deeper than systems, deeper even than consistency. It's identity. Because at the end of the day, you don't act in alignment with your goals. You act in alignment with who you believe you are. This is the part most people skip. They try to change behavior without changing self-image. They try to wake up early while still identifying as not a morning person. They try to build a business while still identifying as someone who procrastinates. They try to get in shape while still identifying as naturally lazy. And every time they act against that identity, it feels unnatural. Forced. Temporary. So they fall back, not because they lack motivation, but because their identity pulls them back to equilibrium. Your identity is like a thermostat. You can temporarily push the temperature higher with motivation. But if the thermostat is set low, it will regulate you back down. This is why bursts of inspiration don't last. Because you didn't upgrade the thermostat. You just turned up the heat for a moment. And here's the uncomfortable truth. If deep down you see yourself as inconsistent, you will subconsciously prove it. If you see yourself as disciplined, you will subconsciously protect it. Behavior follows belief, and belief is built through evidence, not affirmations, evidence. Every time you show up, even in a small way, you gather proof. Proof that you are someone who follows through. Proof that you are someone who trains. Proof that you are someone who writes. And that proof slowly rewires identity. This is why tiny habits matter so much. Not because of the physical result, but because of the psychological vote. One push-up doesn't transform your body, but it transforms the story you tell yourself. I am someone who does what I said I would do. And that story is more powerful than any motivational speech. Motivation tries to push you forward. Identity pulls you forward. And pulling is stronger than pushing. When a behavior becomes part of who you are, you no longer debate it. You defend it. Think about someone who identifies as a runner. They don't run because they feel like it. They run because that's who they are. Skipping feels like a contradiction, and humans hate internal contradiction. We will go to great lengths to remain consistent with our self-image. So if you want to make motivation irrelevant, stop trying to become energized. Start trying to become someone different, not through declarations, through repetition. Identity change is slow, it's subtle, it's built through quiet consistency, not emotional intensity. This is also why shame is dangerous. When you fail and say, "I'm so lazy," you reinforce an identity, and identities defend themselves. Soon, laziness becomes expected, normal, safe. Instead, detach identity from failure. Missing once does not make you inconsistent. Quitting does. There is a massive difference between "I failed today" and "I am a failure." One describes an event, the other describes a person. If you want long-term change, protect your identity at all costs. Let your habits reinforce a new story. Small action, small proof, stronger belief, and easier action. That loop is far more powerful than motivation spikes. Because once belief strengthens, resistance weakens. You don't need to hype yourself to act in alignment with who you are. You simply act. And here's the most important shift. Stop asking, "How do I stay motivated?" Start asking, "What would the disciplined version of me do right now?" Then do that. Even in a small way, especially in a small way. Because consistency at low intensity beats intensity with inconsistency. This is how professionals operate. They don't wake up daily and rediscover passion. They protect identity. They guard standards. They repeat behaviors that reinforce the story they believe about themselves. And over time, that story becomes unshakable. When identity changes, behavior stabilizes. When behavior stabilizes, progress compounds. When progress compounds, results become inevitable. And motivation becomes background noise, not the engine. Just the occasional spark. The truth is this: you don't need more inspiration. You need a stronger self-concept. Because once you believe you are the kind of person who shows up, showing up stops being dramatic. It becomes normal. And normal is sustainable. By now, you might notice something subtle. The most powerful shift isn't external, it's internal. You stopped chasing a feeling and started building a framework. And that changes everything. Because once motivation is no longer required, progress stops being emotional. It becomes mechanical, not robotic, not lifeless, but reliable. And reliability is what transforms ordinary people into extraordinary ones. Think about the people you admire. The writer who publishes consistently, the athlete who trains year-round, the entrepreneur who builds for a decade without applause. From the outside, it looks like passion. From the inside, it's structure, it's repetition, it's standards. It's showing up long after the initial excitement fades. We romanticize the highlight reel, but we ignore the thousands of ordinary days that built it. Days without applause, without adrenaline, without cinematic music swelling in the background. Just quiet execution. That is the real secret. Motivation creates intensity. But intensity is loud. Sustainable progress is quiet. It's almost boring. And that's why so few people commit to it. Because there's nothing glamorous about doing the same small thing every day. Until one day, you look up and you're unrecognizable. Not because you changed overnight, but because you refuse to negotiate with your future. This is where most people misunderstand discipline. They think discipline feels powerful. But most days, discipline feels neutral. You wake up, you train, you work, you build, you repeat. No emotional fireworks, just alignment. And alignment compounds. The reason motivation feels necessary is because we've built lives that require emotional energy to function. We rely on bursts, on hype, on urgency, on pressure. But pressure-based systems collapse when pressure fades. Structure-based systems don't. They carry you through low-energy days, through stress, through doubt, through boredom, because the behavior is already decided. And once behavior is decided, your identity reinforces it. Now imagine your life 1 year from now if you stopped asking, "Do I feel like it?" and started saying, "This is who I am." Imagine the version of you who trains even when tired, who writes even when uninspired, who studies even when distracted. Not dramatically, just consistently. You don't need to be extreme. You need to be stable. Because stability builds trust with yourself, and self-trust is the foundation of confidence. Most people don't lack confidence. They lack evidence. They don't trust themselves because they've made too many emotional promises that dissolved when motivation disappeared. But when you begin to act without needing motivation, something powerful happens. You start keeping promises to yourself. Small ones at first, then bigger ones. And every kept promise strengthens identity. I am reliable. I am disciplined. I am someone who finishes. That identity becomes armor. It becomes protection against excuses. Because once you see yourself as consistent, inconsistency feels foreign, uncomfortable, out of character, and humans will fight to protect their character. This is the final truth about motivation. It was never supposed to carry your life. It was only meant to spark the beginning. But transformation is not sparked into existence. It is built, layer by layer, decision by decision, day by day. The people who succeed long-term are not the most inspired. They are the most structured. They removed choice from the equation. They reduced friction. They built identity. They trusted systems over feelings. And slowly, quietly, they became unstoppable. Not because they felt powerful every day, but because they stopped waiting to feel powerful. You don't need more motivation. You need fewer negotiations. You don't need a better playlist. You need a better default. You don't need to become inspired. You need to become aligned. And once you do, motivation becomes optional. Not irrelevant, just unnecessary. It may visit occasionally. It may give you a boost. But it no longer controls your trajectory. Because your trajectory is decided. And when progress is decided, not debated, that's when your life changes. Not loudly, not suddenly, but permanently.